can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Wise here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Andy Ruben of Trove. You can check him out at Trove.com. And Andy, before I formally introduce you, I always like to point out other episodes of the podcast people should check out. When I think of, and the research I've done for Trove is they invented re-commerce, and we'll talk about what that means, but it's really all about sustainability. And so some of my favorite interviews in the sustainability front was Tom Zaki of TerraCycle. He talked about how to make money from 1.5 million cigarette butts and how to save the world. That was a great episode. And also just developing sustainable solutions with beer waste with Dan Kurzrock of Regrain. They used to go from, have you heard of Regrain before?
Yep.
You have?
Yep,
okay.
Yep.
It's genius. It's like the beer companies need to throw out the spent grain, and they actually even pay to throw it out. So like, why not have someone come pick it up and reuse it and sell it? It's like a no-brainer offer. Like, we'll come pick it up and we'll make stuff out of it, right? So I love that episode, that and many more at Inspired Insider. How do you know about Regrain?
Just being in the sustainability space.
Okay.
I feel like this space is not nearly big enough. And so you just
who are some of your favorite companies in sustainability that are, we all know like the Patagonias of the world and any ones that maybe other people have not heard about. Like I wouldn't have heard of Regrained before someone mentioned them.
I'm going to go in opposite direction. The companies I love most in sustainability are the ones you'd never think of for it. Airbnb. Instead of building a brand new hotel ground up, let's use a house that's not occupied, a room that's not occupied. Let's be able to be like in a place you couldn't have a hotel. To me, like those are the things that are more interesting is when you ride sharing is another good one. When you take things that are so obvious now, you'd never think about them as being sustainability because they're just better. And if sustainability is ever going to have out of it what we need, which it will, it better have a reason to be, meaning we better all love Airbnb more than staying at a Hyatt, or it's not going to matter.
Totally. Love it. This episode is brought to you by Rise 25. Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect their dream relationships and partnerships. We do that in two ways. One, we're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the strategy, accountability, and the full production execution. Number two, we're also an easy button for a company's gifting, right? So we make gifting and staying top of mind to your clients, partners, prospects, even staff from a culture perspective. All people do is give us a list of their people and we do everything else. Kind of, Andy, we call ourselves the magic elves that run in the background to make it stress-free and easy for companies to build amazing relationships. And I've found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I admire on the podcast and also send them sweet treats in the mail. So check it out, rise25.com. You can email us at support@rise25.com. I am super excited to introduce Andy Ruben. He's widely recognized as a retail pioneer known for launching Walmart's acclaimed sustainability initiatives as its first chief sustainability officer and reimagining private brands, spearheading early omnichannel innovations, and founding Trove, which we're going to talk about. And Trove is the company credited with creating the branded resale category alongside iconic brands such as Patagonia, REI, and Lululemon, and many, many more. He's been recognized by Fast Company, Fortune, and others as a transformative leadership, and currently serves as a board member and advises Fortune 500 corporations. One of those, I think, is Zevia, and I actually love Zevia. So you have it there.
Never far from me.
So I want to start off, Andy, just talk about Trove and what Trove does.
Yeah, sure. I love when you talk about the easy button. When you think about a brand, let's take Patagonia. When you think about a brand that really stands for something that's got something to say that we love, the idea that you would buy a Patagonia jacket for a kid and then the brand is gone. You own that Patagonia jacket, and the idea is when you're no longer using it, when your kid outgrows it, you just hand it back, trade it in, get money back for it, and then get the next size. So the idea that the Trove and the Trove technology can make it easy for brands to do the back end work so that a company like, you're looking at some here, Filson, Arc'teryx, Eileen Fisher, Brooks, whomever, that they can make it easier for their customers to just stay engaged with the brand. And who needs a closet full of old jackets you never wear? So just make it easy for your customers to stay with you. And by the way, when they hand items back, they typically stay with the brand for the next item. You take those items, especially in a moment of uncertainty in supply chain, and you create a supply of items that net new customers can now afford. So when a brand sells a used item, typically 2/3 of the customers who buy have never bought from the brand. Think about it like a negative CAC, being paid for CAC, right? So customer acquisition. Anyway, it just makes sense. And where I've always seen the world going is that at some point, we won't think about products that we just buy them and they just kind of amass in our lives. We'll think about a world where we choose brands, we have access to better products, and they come in and out of our lives. And the way that we make that easy is we don't do it through a new website we've never heard of. We do it through the brands we love. We do it through the retailers we love. Because when we're shopping REI anyway, maybe I can spend less today because I'm bringing in a tent that I haven't used in 2 years and someone else can be using it.
I've heard you say this, Andy. Would you rather sell an item once or 4 times? And, there's an obvious answer to that, right?
Yeah, yeah. One of the first conversations we had with the CEO at the time of Patagonia, and this is in 2015, 2016, when we were first conceiving that a brand would buy back and resell their items online, was let's talk about your inventory. And, a brand typically, when you ask that, will talk about items in warehouses and stores. But 80% of the goods that a brand like a Carhartt owns are in our closets. They're in our lives. So when you think about inventory, every CEO will want to be sharing with the board that they're optimizing all their inventory, not just the 10, 15% that's in stores and warehouses, but every one of those hard-made, designed, thoughtful pieces. It's a brand asset. What CEO is comfortable having a warehouse 20% occupied, right? Just sweat your assets.
Having the idea and solving the problem are two different things. Right? This is a complicated, it's fragmented. There was fragmented solutions before you came in, right? People would go on, maybe they send it to the thrift store, maybe they would go on eBay, who knows, the solutions people, but also it's trusted. Like if I'm getting a used car or something like that, I actually like going to the dealership and getting a certified used car. It's just more trusted. So I'm curious, and I also know it didn't start the idea didn't start to what it ended up. So I'd like to walk through kind of the evolution of Trove a little bit. And what was the original idea and the company? What did it look like in the beginning?
Yeah, Trove, before it was Trove was an entirely different company. Company was called Yerdle. We can talk about the name, but it was a moment where that name did not sound as odd as it does now. And that company was born in 2011. And the idea was a community where we would, there's an alternative currency and you'd move items between people. Actually, originally, it was a company that you would loan items to your friends. And it was born in the same moment as Zynga and companies that were built into the social graph on Facebook, kind of early days of Facebook. So you could loan out items to your first degree friends on Facebook. And, we realized that of people loaning items, it was actually many more people were looking to just kind of bequeath and kind of give items to other people, but kind of like a bottle of wine. You didn't really want to walk over to someone's house for dinner and hand them a $25 bill. You wanted to bring a bottle of wine. So it became uncomfortable to use a fiat currency. And so we created a currency that was really about the goods. What was great about that? So by year 3 or 4, it was very typical of a company. It wasn't wildly financially successful, but it wasn't unsuccessful. We had millions of monthly active users. There were millions of items being exchanged. We had weddings where people met on the Yerdle platform.
How
People
did
on
you get
eBay.
millions of people? I mean,
Oh,
that in itself is a feat, whether
yeah.
someone's monetizing it as much as they could or not. I mean, that's
Yep.
not easy.
There were a lot of breakthroughs along the way. Originally, we, had probably dozens, a few that were really central. Originally, it was all local. There was a breakthrough and we allowed people to ship items because you got a lot more liquidity. Liquidity really matters. I mean, the simple way to say it, it was like a 501 level class on marketplaces. And I remember in that moment, I remember sitting with people who knew so much more than me about marketplaces because I'm from Walmart. Like I'm not used to marketplaces at the time. And the people I would sit with would look at me like, oh, silly, silly man, here's, you can't just start a marketplace. You've got to seed one side of it. And so we would send people out. Maybe a funny story, but we had a bank. I think we were using Bank of America and we would take out cash from Bank of America and hand it to like 15 people we'd find on TaskRabbit, Leah's company, TaskRabbit, and they'd go out to garage sales and they'd curate items and we'd have days where we'd have the supply and then we'd have buyers and we'd slowly build a two-sided marketplace and you've got to have one side. And then at some point, the amount of money we were shelling out in $20 bills became so concerning to Bank of America that we were having trouble. So we had to go to multiple banks to get the amount of cash out so
What did
we
they
could
think you
then,
were doing? Like buying drugs or something?
oh my gosh, I don't know. But it was just like I remember standing with someone fairly high up in Bank of America explaining it was my money, it was my company, and it was okay that we would withdraw cash. But it's all the things that happen, right, in the early journey of a startup. And some of them sound fun like that in retrospect, but really I think the difficult parts are before you come up with those and you're trying to manage 10 people on a Google spreadsheet's no big deal, but all of a sudden you're managing 100 buyers and trying to figure that out on Google. And it's just, things get complex. Then at every stage, you need to figure out. So I think shipping was a big deal. Curating a marketplace, shipping was a big deal. Another breakthrough was offering free shipping for the, items for people who were giving away, bequeathing more items, right? So you have to figure out what behavior you're trying to incentivize. All the things that right now seem straightforward, but at the time to me were brand new. But as I sat with people in the Bay Area, often people who'd grown up at eBay, they were things they just knew. And they would share them, and I would digest them as quickly as possible and grab everyone I could.
So it
Really
started
helpful.
off as that two-sided marketplace platform, which is really difficult. Any two-sided marketplace is difficult. But you
Yep.
built it up to millions of people.
Yep.
What was the next phase of Trove?
There was a moment that I realized. So we were the people in the space at the time. It was Julie from the Real, James at ThreadUp, Manish from Poshmark. There's a group of us, and there weren't that many. And it's early, and we were, by the way, we weren't called. Now it's called Circular. At the time, it was called the Sharing Economy. At the same time as Lyft and Airbnb, and desk sharing and office sharing. And, I realized at a certain point that there were a lot of that the trend, people wanted to do this, but as a startup, I didn't see the ability to return capital to our investors. And honestly, I think the ThreadUp bag was like a breakthrough that I really respected and was jealous of, was a really good breakthrough at ThreadUp. And you'd see these things, and I just realized that there was a need here, but we weren't going to make it as a company unless we changed something. And at the same time, the brands we were working with, we had a bunch of Patagonia on the site. I was talking to Patagonia every week, and Patagonia is like, gosh, it's great. We love what you're doing, but it'd be really nice if our Patagonia jackets weren't next to a coffee maker, right? And we're thinking, oh, so cool. Maybe we should. And Patagonia and Eileen Fisher were working with eBay at the time, with an eBay store, but that wasn't keeping their brand at the level they wanted to see their brand. And so, there was a moment where it became, we really had the aha that the way to make money in the space wasn't to mine for gold, it was to sell Levi's jeans or pickaxe and shovels. So we could be the B2B support for the brands. And the better that the Poshes and, Depops and Vintage did, the more that brands would have to figure this out or lose market share. And then we'd be the technology provider to give them the infrastructure to do that.
What did that look
And that
like
was
then?
um, that I make the pivot sound obvious, like we had a moment that we just decided to switch the business. it was anything but that. I feel like in the honesty of it, it took so long to go through, and I'd never recommend it to anyone. And the only reason I think we actually did it was because I didn't expect to do it. I thought we'd sell Yerdle, and we had an offer on the table for someone to buy the Yerdle kind of platform, the membership, what we'd done. And I think in some ways I might have messed up a final pitch, but anyway, that fell through. We got a second offer, but all the while it's like you're explaining to your investors that you're going to sell the company and it's going to be fine. You're trying to convince a team. We had about 70 people there, and every day I just remember walking into our office downtown San Francisco, and you walk in and someone always pulls you aside and says, Andy, if you've got a minute today. And after a while, you just, somebody would say that and you're like, so and so, I know you're quitting. You don't have to find me. I get it. You're leaving. I wish you well. Like, just leave your whatever at the, you're good. And it just became so hard to get a team to kind of keep the faith that there was a reason to stay when everyone around was leaving. And you were trying to hold that together to sell the company, knowing that if you didn't, you were going to have to figure something else out. And one thing I really regret was how many times I came home and told my spouse that we were going to sell the company and we should celebrate. And obviously, two of those fell through. A third one somewhat came up, and I was exhausted by the process. And at that point, luckily, I guess looking back, we'd become enamored enough about this Patagonia idea. And that was going to launch in 2016 for Black Friday. Patagonia then held off, didn't launch, where I again thought the company was going under. But we went down to probably 4 people out of the 60. Before then, we slowly built it back up to several hundred. But that that was it was fairly dark. I mean, it's not coming across now in my gestures because it's in hindsight, but
Well,
yeah,
I get it. It's like I can feel that even one person coming, hey, do you have a minute? You're like, oh God, and then it's happening over and over again. It's becomes demoralizing in a way
yeah.
and stressful in a way.
I,
So you go
I felt
ahead.
like maybe I think the thing for me is I really worried that I'd led a lot of people that I'd convinced to do this thing, I'd led them all astray. And I think the self-doubt for me was really in like, gosh, what did I do? What did I do to all these people who have kids who left this great iOS engineer who left Comcast with his young daughter? And I just remember like walking with him when I convinced him to join, and he's like, Andy, really, I should leave. Comcast is great. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I didn't quite have the like, you want to sell sugar water, but it's like you convince a lot of people to come join, and you've got to be so you've got to be so bullish on what's going to happen. And then when it doesn't go that way, I felt responsible that I had just really effed up, right? And like you don't know. And you just have to keep guessing, like kind of guessing and having confidence that there's something there, but it's really hard to know.
Yeah, I mean, it was obviously a lot of hard moments leading to a pivot, and then talk about then on the other side. What did that look like with Patagonia then?
Yeah. Well, it wasn't, I mean, it's any people even inside Trove right now seem surprised by these stores, but I think whenever you're starting something that's really net new, of course nobody's doing it or it wouldn't be net new, right? It wouldn't be an interesting new thing that you believe the world needs. I remember for Eileen Fisher, there's someone that I'm still friends with. I was just with her in New York 3 weeks ago, and I mean, I all but stalked her. Like I figured out who was going to be the decision maker, who Eileen would listen to here, and her name was Cynthia. And I was, I made a ticket to New York, and Cynthia couldn't meet with me, and I was basically waiting outside her office for her to walk out of the building. And I kept changing my ticket and staying with friends on their couches because maybe tomorrow I'd like sit outside the darn office until she'd meet with me for 10 minutes. And, you really like, if you don't, I think what's at least what I reflect back on and still feel, if that didn't work, the thing would go under. And if I compare that risk to what would happen in a larger company, like my experience at Walmart or Procter and Gamble, if something didn't work, maybe comp sales would be 3.5%, not 4. But you're still just fine. You might get half your bonus, not all of it. Whereas like if Cynthia didn't say yes, if I couldn't convince Cynthia there was a whole new thing and she had to do it, there'd be no healthcare for everybody I've convinced to join. Like there's no company. And so I think it's what's great about startups is it necessitates putting more on the line. And so your comparison to going for things is being gone as opposed to less of the same. So I think you just, in it's a very real like push to do things that are uncomfortable. And there's a story that we often tell with Patagonia where the CEO said yes. Individual Nelly at one point was going to go with someone who might have been a competitor to us. And I remember I was sitting in this office in San Francisco and she said, "Oh, I'm thinking of doing this other thing." And she was at outdoor retailer in Salt Lake City. And I said, "Nelly, don't go anywhere. I'll be there." And she started to say that she was in Salt Lake City, which I knew. But I hung up the phone, went straight to SFO, jumped on a plane, and showed up. And it was very difficult to get into a conference I wasn't invited to. So you've got to kind of wiggle your way in, explain your retail, all kinds of things. And then eventually, probably 3 hours later, I show up and I find Nelly. She's like, "Oh my gosh, here you are." Right. And I was not going to leave Nelly's side until we had a commitment that we were going to go do this. And I didn't really know what I was going to say. And in that conversation, she gave me one kind of lifeline unexpectedly where she said, "Oh," she said, "it's kind of like the surfboard swaps that Yvonne's been doing." And I'm like, "Yes, that online." Right. And that became the pitch. But it wasn't the pitch going in. It was the pitch because Nelly's like gave me like an ounce of what might work. And so by the time I left, like we were hanging out that night, we've decided we're going to go do this. But those moments happen all the time, and everyone is going to be the end unless you like, just don't worry about it. Head to SFO and get a ticket to wherever you got to go. And I think that's like, I think every entrepreneur's got dozens of those.
Andy, we'll touch on what you're working on now, actually, because I know you're working on a new project. By the time people listen to this, it's out probably. But after hearing all this, I'm thinking, why would you ever start anything else? Like this just, I guess like comparing it to a woman being pregnant. Like, why would you, it's like maybe you forget about it and you have the second one because it's not an easy process at all, to say at the very least. So it's like, I don't know what you call it, but there is some term for it, like just you forget what it's like. But so I'm like, saying all that, you started something new anyways, but so we'll get to that. But I want to know how the implementation works. So walk people through a little bit about, okay, so now people can use Trove. What does that look like for a brand like Patagonia, REI, and Lululemon?
Yeah. So first of all, it's changed a lot since that was 2017 that we launched with, we originally launched with Patagonia, Eileen Fisher, and REI, which we did almost back to back, which was, I'm really, honestly, looking back, there are so many moments too that I'm surprised we made it. We should, like, at the moment that people were buying items, we hadn't quite figured out how we were going to ship the items. At the moment we shipped the items, we hadn't quite figured out how people would return them. We were just one step ahead of the chopping block at every moment. And I'm really, really thankful that somehow the team stuck it out. Like it was more than one should be able to ask for a team, but there's a sense of camaraderie. And yeah, we could go into many stories there. But at that point, because it was a new thing, Trove did everything. So if you bought a used Patagonia item and you called up, you talked to someone at Trove and we pretend we were Warren Wear Patagonia, right? So we were doing the logistics, we were doing data, everything. And then slowly as the industry's developed, which several $100 million now, as it developed from that first sale, it's become more specialized. So over time, brands have said, why would you want to build a separate website for us? We actually have a website and it does quite well. And we have a lot of people who work on that. Can't we just use our website? Right. And so now it's the technology that pipes into your website. We've got a fulfillment operation. Why don't we just use that? So you've got to take the software you used for your own supply chain and buildings and figure out a way that other people can use it, which means you've got to basically totally transform it because you put up internally with a lot of things that clients wouldn't put up for if they're paying for it. All the transitions. So at this point, the industry has really gone to a technology layer. And so the way that a brand would implement that is a new brand shows up and says, the first question is what you want to sequence, like what you really want to, what do you want to do? And typically what I'd recommend to a brand is start with being more of the brand. Like if you're Levi's, just be cooler. If you're Nike, be cooler. If you're Gucci, be more like depending on the designer. Like with Michelle, when Michelle was at Gucci, it was be more expression, self-expression. If you're cat at Patagonia, it's, be more of an activist. So do more of the brand and think about this as a channel. And then Trove's got an implementation team, comes in and helps you figure out how to sequence that, where to get early items, how do you start, how do you build it, what are the metrics and where to go. And it's not turnkey, but it's pretty close right now. And Trove now has a number of competitors, and so there are options in the marketplace. It's a good and bad thing. I think it's good overall for the industry, hard for anyone who started something to realize how many people are able to just pick up all the early work and just start with where you are 3 or 4 years in, which they will give you compliments about, but really it's a thing. It's tough.
If let's just take an example. I have some Lululemon stuff at home, let's say.
Yep.
What does a consumer do then? Are they going to Lululemon store? Like, I mean, like how does that work from a consumer perspective?
Bring a Lululemon item into any Lululemon store. You walk in, you're holding 5 items. Any of the Lululemon in stores will call their employees educators. So any of the educators, and you're a guest, any of the educators will take back those items and hand you a gift card. It should take no more than 30 seconds.
And then do they have like they're using kind of Trove software to do what happens after that when Lululemon takes it?
So here's where the software comes. Here's what the software basically helps you figure out what the item is, how to price how much money you get back to a customer given the condition, because all these items, compared to when Lululemon or anyone would have bought the original item, which the condition, it's all new. You don't know where the item's been since it's been seen last, right? So the condition, what to do with the items. So some items should get recycled. Some of them should get resold by the brand, right? By Arc'teryx. Some should get resold in a store. REI resells some items in stores, some online, some both. Some items go to eBay, right? A brand might decide this is an item that is resellable, but not for our platform. You mentioned certified pre-owned cars. You bring a Lexus in. Sometimes it's certified pre-owned. Sometimes it's a used car on the Lexus lot. Sometimes it goes to auction. So the idea is help every customer make use of whenever they're holding an item, make it super easy. I love easy button. Love that. And then on the other side, just list it. We all know how to buy things. The brand just shows us new and used. And where the world is going, and some of the brands we work with are leading here, you just be shopping for a men's Patagonia medium nano puff, and they would just say, "Hey, Andy, the black nano puff you're looking at for 160. By the way, here's one we've already made for 90. Do you want that one? It's in excellent condition." And you know that it's Patagonia, so you buy it, you don't like it, you send it back, or you bring it back to a store. So it's just where we are going is the distinction between new and used will go away. And in that, brands have an ability to sell their item multiple times. But so as a customer, they just make it like it's shopping. And it's just when you go in, you just bring items and you get money for them and you get things you want now.
It's super interesting. We were chatting before you hit record, and you had mentioned I would maybe do things different on the business development front. I mean,
oh yeah,
what you did. I mean, you're jumping on planes. You're showing up at conferences. I mean,
yeah.
And you're not even guaranteed to get into the conference or even talk to the person itself.
Right. Yep.
So I'm curious your thoughts on business development and what your experience been, what worked, what didn't work, what you would do differently there.
Yeah, that was the moment in reflection. The moment that I messed up on wasn't that first moment when we were really small and I was trying to convey a new idea. And I was kind of the tip of the spear because, I knew retail and brands and it was my idea. And I could really, I think one of the beauties of a startup is you have to get so deep in this space that allows you to really be helpful to other people when you're trying to explain it, because you can go anywhere they want to go, typically, most places. And so where in reflection I messed up is when we started to get bigger. So you go from 2 or 3 brands to 10 brands, 20 brands, 30 brands, and then you're trying to sell and you've got more people in the pipeline. And um, I made the mistake of trying to bring in professional salespeople. And I did it because I thought, just like everything else, like when you're early on, you're the head of operations, you're the head of product, you're the CFO, you're the head of business development. Maybe you divide things with other founders and you bring other people on. But so I thought, gosh, business development's a craft and I should bring in someone who's really good at this. It's not me. And if I could have gone back, it's not that was the wrong move, the timing was off. There's a moment and later on I think I realized I don't know who I heard on a podcast, but they were basically explaining how founders often mess that up. And I'm sitting there listening to podcasts going, oh my gosh. I'm like case study A, B, and C on that. And what I did was, I tried to outsource that sales motion before it was a motion. And there's a moment where you're still inventing the motion. I think that's really got to be done by a founder. And what I would have done, and I did get advice I didn't listen to, unfortunately, here, but I would have been in every one of those. And instead of hiring a sales lead, I would have hired sales support so that I could have spent time in front of clients with the support that I wasn't also the one trying to figure out, the sales funnel and cold calling, and I would have gotten support. Anyway, so I just made the move too early, and what happened is I think we just missed uh, on several occasions having someone who was really good at sales, but not. It wasn't their fault. It was that the company wasn't ready to have that person yet because we couldn't hand them the playbook.
I'd love to hear some of the big lessons you learned at Walmart, Andy, because I know you went from VP Corporate US Strategy to Chief Sustainability Officer, VP of Private Brands, VP of Global E-commerce and Omnichannel. What are
Yep.
some of the big lessons at Walmart? I mean, you're there for, I think, a decade,
Yeah.
right? So talk about some big lessons there.
The one of the gosh, there's so many lessons. What I took away overall for that company, and I'm so thankful for, is that say what you want about Walmart, but any company that's been successful like it has over time has a culture and has a way of working that has been successful, undeniably successful. And when right before we started, you mentioned reading Sam Walton's book, which I'd recommend to anyone in retail because it's just one of those. You need to read about Sam Walton, you need to read about Jim Senegal at Costco and, Price Club, and they're just kind of modern retail. They were the pioneers. But the culture and the leadership was so extraordinary. And it's the type of experience that there's a lot of books written about leadership because I think it's so elusive. It's kind of, it when you see it. But to be a part and to work for people, I got to work for Lee Scott, who was the CEO of Walmart for 6 years. And there was an internal joke that I spent more time with Lee than his wife, Linda. So I ran strategy for Lee and then got to start sustainability. And the number of times I would get to be kind of in his office when something was going on and to just kind of absorb, to see the way that he would handle it. There's not a day that goes by in anything else I've done since that I don't, he just, one of those learnings or moments pops into my head. And it's why I give, people in school advice who want to do sustainability or startups, or that there's so many different places to start. And if you start in big companies, grab all the leadership lessons you can. Then when you go to startups, apply them, learn, like figure out why they, and what I found was there's so many things that maybe I thought I understood when I was at a big company, but didn't understand until I messed them up myself. And then would go back and realize, gosh, there's a reason that we did a Friday meeting, and there's a reason that it happened like it happened. And there's there's a moment I remember at Walmart with the current CEO where I was sitting with the current CEO that was at that point head of Sam's Club, was CEO of Sam's Club, Doug McMillan. And I was basically in Doug's office and I was complaining about a peer of mine. And I walked into Doug's office, and this is someone, David Redfield, who I've stayed close with. And I was complaining that David Redfield just wasn't on board. Doug looked at me and he said, David? I said, yeah. And all of a sudden, Doug's on his phone. He's calling David. He's like, David, it's Doug. I'm here with Andy. And he said, you're just not playing ball. And all of a sudden, I'm on speaker with myself, David, and Doug. And Doug said, Andy, go ahead. And there I am. And I'm face to face now complaining to the CEO of Sam's Club about what David Redfield is or isn't doing. And it's like you learn things by being in that environment that, like, I don't know how many leadership books I would have had to read to learn what Doug, I mean, they're like, and there are thousands of those.
I love that. I'd love to hear, Andy, some of your favorite books. So I mentioned when we were talking, Sam Walton, Made in America. I just listened to it a couple weeks ago. Fantastic, amazing, one of my favorites. Now, what are some of your favorite other business leadership books
Yep.
that you'd recommend?
I am having a small obsession right now with complexity. So, Santa Fe Institute. So I just finished Scale. Let me go back to favorite all times. I always have a problem with like what I've read lately tends to be my favorite book. The ones that I think have really moved me. There's one that Jeff Bezos always talks about with blanking on the name with the normal distribution versus the long tail distribution. Um, the Black Swan
Mm.
is a fundamental book. Um, other fundamental books. A podcast that I really enjoy is Acquired, just because it's got really good stories to it, right? And they like basically do a monthly book as a podcast. I love biographies in that same way. Um, other books right now. So, gosh, Black Swan, Sapiens is kind of an obvious one. I'm blanking right now
Might be
on
behind
books.
you over there. That
Yeah, but actually better. I won't be able to do it fast enough. I actually keep an ongoing list. I I I really enjoy reading more than I can describe, and I feel like if I could just ingest books faster, I would.
what was the
Um,
latest you said was Scale? Was that the recent
yeah,
one?
Scale's looking at how kind of nature develops with metabolism, right? Metabolism is like ingestion of energy that either goes to maintenance or growth. And it's looking at biological and ecological systems and then compares them to companies as systems in cities. And one of the things fascinating me right now is if you think of companies that are more than 100 years old, there are very few of them. You think of cities that have been around more than 100 years, and pretty much all of them. And you realize that things happen in the organizational and construct of a city that don't happen in companies. And it just puzzles me and pushes on what we could do better in leadership as companies that we wouldn't be as susceptible to shocks and changes. And I think that generally there are things that obviously have worked really well for companies, but in the moment we're in right now, where nobody can keep up with the pace of change, like I would just go out and say it's absolutely just nobody. I was sitting last week with some of the AI companies, Perplexity and the likes, and I was having a moment where I was realizing that no matter how hard I try, it's just really hard to keep up with what is happening. And so as you think about that from an organizational standpoint in a company, if an individual can't, how does a leadership team possibly keep up? And so I think we're in need of some additional structures and ways of doing things. And I've been looking toward other models. And I've also tried to, I don't think it can be a wholesale change of leadership because I've also seen those things not work before. But I think there's supplemental ways to keep people learning and being curious in corporations that give them a little bit more resilience to the amount of change happening right now.
Andy, what I find fascinating about your journey, again, I did a lot of research for this. So early on, I would have been like, Andy's going to start his own company. He's an entrepreneur. I remember hearing the story of you fixing VCRs. My favorite part of that story about fixing VCRs is, or not fixing, but actually installing VCRs.
Yep.
And you're like, it took you 2 seconds. But one of the lessons, I think, for any company, software, whatever, is you couldn't make it look too easy or they wouldn't pay you a lot. So you would actually wait. Even if it took you 1 second, you kind of sit there for a while, unplug and unplug it. And that's actually, I heard a software founder do this, like his software would spit out the answer right away. And they're like, well, they won't value it. So he started like a timing bar on the
Yeah,
screen. So when they inputted it, it took a little bit of time to load, even though it could have just spit out. So it was the same applicability to a
that's absolutely right.
software. But like I would think, okay, early on, young Andy is going to be an entrepreneur, right? But then I look at your Walmart career for 10 years and I'm like, okay, he's just going to be corporate forever.
Yeah.
And then, so what made you decide, okay, I need to do this entrepreneur thing, right? Because I'm like, oh, 10 years at Walmart. I mean, I don't know what
Yep.
it is normally. If you get through 5 years, you're going to be there for 20 years or something. But
Right.
what made you decide to then, okay, I'm ready to spread my wings and just do my own thing?
I
And
I really I had ideas that I feel like I had four different roles at Walmart. When I had a lot of autonomy, when I was working for someone like the CEO, I could really spread my wings. And there was a lot of patience and forgiveness and almost push, right, to do those. The last role was a difficult role because I think it was difficult for the company. It was reporting to the board, and it was how Walmart would adapt to e-commerce. And I think it was of the four
that's a
roles, it
big
was the one
question.
that, yeah, it was. I think it's a really important question because I think there's a lot of learning in that because it's not, I never buy the fact that people in companies who get out innovated aren't smart people. They're always smart and they're always working toward being relevant. So then it becomes what gets in their way of addressing a major change. And I think you've got to look deeper than just saying, oh, they just missed that photos would be taken by a phone. They just missed that, phones wouldn't just be phones, whatever the changes are. Like you've got to go deeper. And I think then you really get into what makes business so fascinating, which is humans. And we're so weird and in beautiful ways, but it's understanding how we behave and why we behave that way is where the depth is on how companies miss these things. So that fourth role was very difficult for me, and I wanted to spread my wings again. And I think I had some arrogance and I had some desire just to try some things. One thing that I've looked back and missed about Walmart is I really missed the scale. When you go from having scale and getting to do things that just are on the shelf, changing packaging, right? Or whatever it is, you see it, 150 million people see it next week. And you go from that environment to trying to convince someone who doesn't care, no one's ever heard of the company you work for and trying to convince someone of the, where you work and what you do and why you do it. That is, boy, it's a great way to find some humility, for sure. But I think
I
that
don't
it's
know
just,
about
I
a
really
great
wanted to
way,
try
but
it.
it is a way to find
It's
humility.
might be a fast way. And I think what's kept me with it, you mentioned, so I feel like I just started something new. And I think what keeps me in it is the challenge and the fun of that. And that every time you do something, one of the things that I really held close to me all the way through on the last 15 years in startups is never waste a good crisis. The only way to approach an environment where most likely, I mean, high odds are that you will be irrelevant and gone in a year. So if you do everything right, you might just survive. Um, the only way to survive that is all the things that pop up. You just have to I think that idea of never waste a good crisis almost reframes it for the team and for you. That's like, okay, cool. It is what it is. We can't, let's go. Let's figure it out. And what can we make out of this crap show that we are now dealing with? And so I think the same goes for learning in general. And as I start a third thing, gosh, I want to do so many things differently. And it's like I never tire of doing it once and going, cool, that was good, but oh my gosh, how would I do it better? This, by the way, was a core part of Walmart culture. Walmart, Sam Walton used to call it, I think it was in the book, correction of errors. No matter how good something is going, there are always ways to be better. And I talked to a founder yesterday who was talking about growth, and his growth numbers were fantastic. And he was giving me some line about how we just don't have to raise money. And I'm like, BS. Could you grow faster? Like your whole thing is relevance. Don't stop saying that. Could you grow faster? And it's like there is always a moment to look back at whatever you're doing and be better. And I love that. So anyway, starting a third thing, I want to do it again.
Talk about that for a second. I know we have a few minutes left. something new. What are you going to do differently this time around? And I just want to point out, I don't know if you've written a book, but I think you just said the title of your next book, if you do, but Never Waste a Good Crisis is a good title. So I don't know. You're busy enough, but I'd love to read that book. So yeah.
Oh my gosh, super kind. Looking back at Trove, like of the things I look at the things I would do differently right now and the advice I give people is to be crazily focused on the thing you have to do at the moment, as opposed to the 10 other things you can do. And you just don't have a lot of ability with a small team to do more than one thing, really. And so I want to see how fast with this new company we can get from, we're measuring everything in days right now. Like, when did we incorporate? How fast can we get the first contract with a client? It's a B2B company. How fast can we get that first contract? Could we get enough money from people who want this thing, or get enough feedback of why they don't and fix it before we ever actually have to spend the money? Like, how much could we optimize the financial game of a company? And boy, I hope to never raise money. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, I don't know. But like, when I was starting out, I feel like I was more susceptible to trying to understand this venture space, and I wanted to be in it. And I read a bunch of books, and I kind of wanted to see myself in that way and learn about the VC model and just want to do something that needs doing in the world. And I want to figure out how fast I can take that idea and make it real. And I want to optimize for that, as opposed to a dozen other things that I think I've gotten distracted by in the past. Going to conferences, doing pitch competitions. Those could be fine. I'm not saying they're bad, but just I want to optimize for the thing that really matters at the moment.
Staying focused and just as fast as you can to either feedback or customer.
Every hour that goes by, money is only time, and every hour that goes by is an hour. And if you can do something this hour, it's better than next hour. Like, I think that pace of getting to relevance is just I wish there were, I really hope there are more startups in the world, because I think it's such big companies are really good at the flywheel. They provide stability, they do great things, they add a lot of value in the world. But the role of startups is to evolve how we do things. And it's the specific role that these things are not being done right now. And then you've got to figure them out financially. And the world could use more of that.
Andy, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thanks for sharing your journey, stories, lessons. It's been really instructive. I really enjoyed just learning about this even before the conversation. Everyone can check out trove.com to learn more, and then check out what Andy's doing next. We're not going to mention it now, but you could check him out, Andy Ruben, Ruben, on LinkedIn, and just check out what he's doing there. So Andy, thanks so much.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Awesome.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like $100 grand.